Thank you for joining us on SunScream. Tonight's guest is Veronica G. Henry, author of Bacchanal. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our guest. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our guest, Veronica G. Henry. Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
My pleasure, and congratulations on Bacchanal.
Thank you.
It seems to be a bit of a runaway. Even before it came out, it was on numerous lists of the book to look out for the summer.
It was, and you never know what to expect. The publishing process is a long one, as I'm sure you're probably aware. So you spend so much time editing and going over things, and then going through that whole process of publication, book cover, and all that. And all of that buildup and all that time, you really have no idea of how the book is going to be received. You have your hopes and your wishes and all that. So just the reception so far has been unbelievable, more than I could ever have hoped for. And I am eternally grateful.
I think I should begin by apologizing that we don't have chocolate cupcakes to share.
So you did learn that was one of my weaknesses. Anything chocolate, actually, but I do have a thing for cupcakes. I make it a point to sample the best cupcakes in every place that I visit. So it's a thing.
Do you have any shout outs for cupcakes you want to give?
Gosh, there is a place in Georgetown, in DC, and I can't remember the name of it, but you want to talk about an awesome cupcake. That was a good one. And then there's a local place that I go. It's Once in a Blue Moon Bakery here in Cary. And there's so many others, but yeah, those are a couple of my favorites.
So, I mean, there's a lot of themes in Bacchanal. And as always, I'm giving the warning to our viewers, spoilers ahead. We spoil everything here. Mm-hmm. But there's some major themes I want to get into before I get into some more nitty gritty details, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Now it's this interesting confluence. You're a person who's from the North. You're from New York, if I'm not mistaken, and you're writing about the South. And you're writing about the South in a very particular time period of a lot of confluences. In that you're writing about Depression era, still legacies of Jim Crow, Gilded Age, South, yes. Particularly Louisiana. Why?
That's a really, really good question. First, let's talk about the South. So absolutely, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and partially raised there. But my mom is from the South. She's from South Carolina. And like many kids during that time, a lot of my summers were spent in South Carolina. And I would go to visit my grandmother, lots of extended family that lived down there. So I have both of those experiences that I carry around with me, right? And so it makes for a very unique mix of experiences growing up. So when I thought about, doing a book based on a carnival, I could certainly do one modern day. Carnivals still exist, and they certainly, have folks that go and visit and enjoy carnivals today. However, I thought about the heyday of the carnival, and that was certainly probably in the 30s, maybe the 40s, even during the time of the Great Depression. So I married those two things together, and I thought this is an era that was rife with, so much challenge, I think, both ecologically, economically, and socially. So I thought, when you're writing a novel, you don't want everything to go smoothly, right? So you want some conflict. And I thought, what better way to introduce some conflict than to set this story in the 30s during all of that's coming together, and see what magic I could make out of it.
Is there a particular reason you picked Louisiana out of all the South? Because obviously there's a different flavor I'm from the South, and I've lived in different areas in the South. So I'm curious why Louisiana specifically, versus say Georgia or South Carolina.
That's a really good question. And there are two things. One, I know that New Orleans in particular, but certainly the state of Louisiana, it's just very, very rich in history. There is something about that city. I've only visited once, but it's just never left me. It has a soul, it has a history, and it has a culture that's such a mixture of everything African, of French, of Spanish, And all of that is still alive today. So the place kind of just left its mark on me. And I thought, I'm definitely going to set a story there. And the other thing is that I thought, you know, just in terms of places to start roaming the South, where I wanted to end up, it was a good place to start as well. I knew that the carnival would make its way up toward Oklahoma and end there. So I thought, well, why not combine the city that I love, or the state, because we actually do start in Baton Rouge that I love, and then make my way out from there.
You get some interesting things too. I mean, you mentioned the culture of Louisiana sort of radiating out of New Orleans. And I have read that, you identify very strongly with Sierra Leone in terms of personal identity. And I'm curious in terms of the development, if some of the transculturation implied into the book in terms of the demon and that sort of storytelling around that is being transculturated from other belief systems, say from Africa by way of the Caribbean into the South, and then disseminating greatly over the country as the carnival moves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, finding my ancestry, I certainly obviously was not born in Sierra Leone, but I did have the opportunity to trace my African ancestry and trace that to the Mende people of Sierra Leone, and made the trip over there. And that trip was absolutely really informative. So I made a couple stops on the continent before landing in Sierra Leone. But from there, not only spending time in the country, and I had the opportunity to spend almost a month there. So, just immersing myself in the language, and the culture, and the food, and the people, and just trying to, in a sense, reconnect what, you probably can't connect, but as close as I could get. But after that experience, and even prior, because my dad was really very much into African ancestry and culture and things like that, those were the books, artifacts, and things that were in our home. So some of the research that I did after I came back, some of the reading, fiction and otherwise that I did, people like Chinua Achebe, all the greats from the continent, people that I'd read and understood, and just kind of, took all of that in. So all of that went into Bacchanal as well, a mixture of the Yoruba culture, some of the folklore, certainly that came into play as well. And all of those things, everything that I've read, every place that I've visited, every picture that I've seen, even, all of those things kind of came together and find their way into the novel.
Yeah, I definitely was interested in your relationship to some of the art, and particularly the masks of coastal Africa, because I got the sense of that in terms of some of the development. And I think that there's like a legacy of that you experience when you read Bacchanal.
Yes, there were masks in our home, right? There were masks growing up, things that my dad had cultivated from who knows where at this point, not even sure. But I grew up with those types of things. And in addition, there's a tradition of carnival in the Caribbean that actually originated from Spain. But when it was brought over to the Caribbean, it infused with some of the African cultural aspects. So there are two different types of masks, right? The things that you might see with a traditional Brazilian carnival or Caribbean carnival, and then the masks that you see in African traditions. And I wanted to blend those and include both of them in the novel as well.
I think that really comes through strongly. And I think the idea of a cultural melting pot is really present. I mean, it's a plethora of cultures, right? It's not just any one. If you're reading it, I mean, you get one thing I really appreciate too in terms of the development of the story, particularly happens early on, and I think page 30 or 40, is the implication of sort of like class in terms of why people leave, why people are in this situation, and then just sort of the Thomas Hobbes quote, right, of life being nasty, brutish, and short. It seems to like get struck home rather early on in the novel.
Absolutely. I think that when you look at, the early part of the novel, what I wanted to do was just kind of establish first the life of the main character of Liza, Meeks. So Liza is a young woman who is abandoned by her family. And she's in Baton Rouge making her way, living her life as best she can. But there are two things that Liza wants, right? She wants to help hone her magical abilities. And she also, despite what she might say verbally, she wants to find her family. She's still curious. She's angry, but she certainly wants to find them. And at that point, she doesn't have much of a way to do either of those things. But when the carnival comes along, it at least affords her an opportunity to do one of those things, which is to travel. Mm-hmm. And traveling means that she might happen across her family. So initially, that's one of the things that I wanted to do, is establish where Liza was coming from, what her desires were, and then present her with the opportunity to at least, go on that journey. And the carnival itself, the setup with Clay being the front person of the carnival versus Geneva being the entity that's behind it and running and fueling the carnival. I also wanted to play into the social constructs of the time, in that there was no way that Geneva, as a Black woman, was going to be able to go to these towns and negotiate fees and really drive the carnival across the country as she wanted. She has a goal too that we'll talk about later. But that's where Clay comes in, and that's why I introduced that character, because I thought initially, I'm like, wait, this is going to work with her as the lead. I'm going to need somebody as a front person. Mm-hmm. So that's where Clay came into play.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting, I was specifically thinking in terms of like a juxtaposition or almost a warning in some way to Eliza is Tommy's death, right? Mm-hmm. That's the sort of moment I was thinking of in terms of just this striking tragedy. I mean, obviously, you have the moment with the guy wrestling the alligator and getting bitten, but I mean, just the almost disposability of a person's life in relationship to this time period was rather striking fairly early on.
Yes, and that was a difficult scene to write, right? It's one of the most difficult in the book. There's another one that was also pretty tough. But this is Geneva as a character is an ancient being. She takes human form when she needs to. But in order to survive, and at the heart of this novel for Geneva is the fact that she wants to survive. And she, in her own way, believes that she's doing so in the only way that she can. She lives off the soul. Spoiler alert was already out. Keep going, right?
Yeah.
She subsists off of the souls of children. But in Geneva's twisted sense of reason, she thinks that if she picks children who otherwise might have a very difficult time in life, who may not even survive, whose parents can't afford to care for them any longer, she thinks that by picking these children, she's making life better for him. That's her reasoning. That's her negotiation, I think, with herself in order to do what it is that she needs to do to survive. Toby as a character came to me just as I thought about children during the 30s, a lot of them, again, in dire circumstances. And I thought of somebody who really wanted to go to the carnival, who might not have the means even to go to the carnival, and what he would be willing to sacrifice or to risk in order to gain entry. So the setup was there. His parents had difficulty caring for him. They were also suffering during the Great Depression, but Toby wanted more than anything to go to the carnival and to get a red truck. And Geneva took advantage of that. But I wanted to have Toby not go quietly into the good night. So Toby is a
You
fighter.
Succeeded.
I had to give him that. I felt bad enough for him. But Toby was a fighter. He did not go quickly and easily. But in the end, he had to succumb to powers greater than his own. So yeah, that was the process for writing that scene, that difficult scene. And it's one that I've heard before that really strikes everyone that reads the novel.
Yeah, it was very, unexpected when I came to it. You'd had, it's interesting. I mean, there's a bit of flavor of, of Mice and Men up to that point. In some ways, but or even like Flowers for Algernon. But
Yes.
you get to that, it's like, whoa, okay, we're here.
Yeah, it was time to shock a little bit, to give folks an understanding of what was really going on behind the carnival, even if our main character had no idea at this point.
I mean, she certainly doesn't. It's interesting too. You switch, the narrative voice switches quite frequently in this text. What was the choice behind doing that in terms of presentation? Because obviously, it kind of fits in some ways, given Liza's powers, that the narrative voice might switch.
Right. That's something that I struggled with, honestly, early on. Because at first I thought this is a novel that's going to be told from Liza's point of view, and that's where we're going to stay, and we're going to see everything, through her eyes. But honestly, the characters, as they developed, they demanded a little bit more. I realized that they had their own stories to tell. And I realized that that was part of what makes this carnival, and in effect, every carnival, unique. And every carnival has a story. So as those characters came to me and I wrote them, um, I got the sense that I needed to show the world, not only through their eyes, but also give them a little bit of history, give them that space on the page for the reader to understand who they were, who these people were, and what actually brought them to a carnival. Because if you check with, most kids these days, or even those days, they wouldn't rank carnival performer as one of the top 10 professions, right?
Right.
So I thought anybody that comes to a carnival that makes that decision to abandon home, abandon family, and to travel all over the country, somebody that does that, there's a reason behind it. So again, as I started writing them, I realized that their stories were strong enough that they needed to be told, and that it would give a greater understanding to the audience about, the lives that went into making this I don't know, home away from home, I guess.
Sure. I have to tell you, some of my favorite moments were the images that animals sent back.
Yes, that was difficult. I have read, and you probably have as well, I have read many novels that have animals that have the ability to communicate either, on their own or through a human, etc. But I wanted to come up with a unique way, as unique as I could, and that's hard to do in this day and age, but as unique a way as I could for the animals to communicate with Liza. And the imagery was important, and not that that's not been done before, but it's how they sent the images. So one thing in particular, I think, when one of the Tasmanian tiger, when she wanted to tell Liza that she was tired of her repeating herself, she sent her an image of her, I think, walking around in circles. So, just trying to come up with imagery that conveyed what the animals were trying to say without being so direct. That was a challenge, but I think it worked out pretty well.
I now imagine you with different pictures of animals with
Absolutely.
index cards.
You know what goes into this, apparently. Yeah, you absolutely, have sketches in the notebook, and that notebook is over there. I have sketches. I have things scratched out. I have angry scratches. I have I have question marks, like, what were you thinking? But there's so much that went into that process. You just have no idea of how much time it took to actually get that communication system down.
I color code when I'm writing.
Oh, uh-huh.
And then I'll go back and I'm like, what in the God's name? Because you forget the code after a while.
You feel my pain, apparently.
Yeah, I truly do. Sorry, I had my own.
That's all right. You're still stuck on the imagery.
My own image just popped in my head. My brain sent me an image of its own, of blue colored text. So in terms of when you came to this story, was it the character of Liza that came first? Was it the demon that came first? What was like sort of people? Because a lot of people have talked to me about something like whispering to them almost, wanting to be written.
That is really funny because most people will say, oh, my protagonist, they were first and foremost in my mind, or the antagonist even. But for me, it was a side character. So I knew I wanted to tell this story long before I wrote anything, before I even got out my first index card. So I started researching, carnivals in general. And then I thought about, well, who's going to populate, this carnival? Certainly you've got people, but you got to have some interesting creatures also. So there was a website that is now, I think, defunct, but it had a website that was detailing mythical African creatures. And in trolling through that, I snagged two of them. One we will talk about later, but the other one was a character called an Iloko. So Noloko is a figure of Zaire, modern day Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's a folklore character out of that space, and he's a forest creature, and he has claws, and he has grass for skin, and he has a taste for human flesh. So that character actually came to me first, and I thought he's definitely got to be a member of the carnival. And I actually wrote a short story about that character. It's kind of an origin story. So it just shows him and his homeland and what's happening. That story is actually published in the first issue of Fire magazine. So it's still out there if somebody wants to go and get it. But it's an origin story for a loco, how he came to be, he and his homeland, and actually how he came to be the last of his kind. And that led him, of course, to flee the area that he was living in. And he hooked up with Geneva and found his way in a carnival. So he was the first character that came to me, and that's really unusual. But he was a side character, but he spoke very loudly and clearly.
Now, in terms of the carnival too, I mean, one of the interesting things is that it seems to be populated with authenticity, I guess is the best way I can put it. Like there's no room for things that in the context of the book aren't authentic or real in the carnival. They're looking for actual acts, as it were.
Mm-hmm. I definitely tried to be as authentic as possible. I did a lot of research on carnivals from the very first one, carnivals, again, that take place in the Caribbean and also those that originated in Spain. There's also another website. It wasn't a website. It was a Yahoo group back when that was a thing. But those are
you have been working on this for a minute.
I absolutely have. But there was a Yahoo group that had, pictures and pictures for authors. They just, can, just really send you off on a bunch of different tangents. But he had pictures of carnivals, of carnival acts, of the people that worked at the carnivals, all types of things. So all of that stuff kind of just went into the book. And I did try to be as authentic as possible, not only for the time period, but for the lingo, the language of the carnival, the challenges that they had in terms of food and supplies, electricity, things like that. Also in how they secured acts and how they went about and how they were different even from a circus. And a lot of people conflated the two, but they're totally different. So all of that research, again, went into informing just not only the way the carnival was set up, but just the day-to-day operations and, just the people that populated it as well.
Now, when you were sort of bringing your cast of characters together to populate your carnival, were there things that perhaps I'm sure there were, that you thought, I don't want to go there, or were there characters that you really excised? And how were those decisions made?
Yeah, there were things that I did definitely decide to keep out. There were some acts that I thought were more exploited. As I did the research, I thought, okay, these are not people who are coming to perform or people that are coming to demonstrate strength or prowess in some area. These were acts that I think were more exploitive in nature, and I thought I'm definitely staying away from those. So there was definite thought that went into what would be in this world and what would not. It's very difficult to write something that checks all of those boxes in terms of being correct about everything and not offensive to one group or another. But all you can do as an author is to do your very best And if you do make a mistake on something, to learn from it and grow from it and go on. But yeah, hopefully I succeeded in putting together a cast of characters that were interesting, that were unique, that were flawed, but that were also representative of what that world would be like during this time.
Yeah, one of the like legacies in all of this, of course, is Todd Browning's Freaks. And I
Mhm.
wondered if that had any bearing on decisions you made or deliberately didn't make.
Yeah, definitely things like that. Again, people with disabilities or people with other physical challenges, things like that. Those were things that I did not want to include in the carnival. Um, I could have done so and could have probably even handled that in a manner that um, explained and actually showed why it was, exploitive in nature. But I just thought there's so many other characters that I can include that I can do a better job with. I'm not even going to go there.
That's fair.
Mhm.
So, I mean, why a demon? I guess we'll dive headfirst into that.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I needed someone malevolent behind the carnival. And I thought that could have been a human, certainly. But I write sci-fi and fantasy. So I certainly had to end up going with the fantastical. And when I thought about, again, this was research and some of the folklore and gods and demons and angels and um, goddesses and all of that, so spirits, all that sort of thing just came into play. And actually Geneva is just kind of like an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. She's not one a copy of one particular spirit or demon. She's just a whole bunch of things thrown in together. um, so that's kind of what was behind it. I thought I needed a character that was not human, not alien. So demon was that was the default choice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested as to why if an author picks the monster they do in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
And she was just a lot of fun. Her history, I had the idea, again, a combination of a bunch of things that went into creating who she would be. But the history of Geneva is something that I had a lot of fun writing as well. It's very easy to write a bad guy. They're the most fun. But I also wanted my bad guy in this instance to be, for people to have some sort of empathy, I guess I can say. Now, yes, empathy with a character that preys on children. Okay, let's get that out of the way. This is a tough sell. I get that.
Well, I mean, you have to love them all, right? As the author.
Absolutely. do have to love them all. And I had to give a reason why Geneva was the way that she was. The backstory of how she was created in her village, the challenges that she had because her mother was special. She had certain ability. And because of that, she was ostracized. Her family was ostracized. And eventually she lost her parents. And being a very young girl on her own, she needed to make some difficult choices. And she allied with the wrong people, made some choices, and took revenge. And that led her on the path that she's on now.
And she is a bone reader. I forget the proper term for that, but
Yes.
at one point knew the actual what kind of mancy that was. I actually used to know.
Yes.
So we're not really given too much information in terms of like what she sees in the bones either. It's always just sort of a
No, that is Geneva's secret. She reads the bones, and the bones speak directly to Geneva. And I didn't feel like we needed to intrude upon that dynamic between the two.
now are they children's bones?
They were not children's bones in my head.
Okay.
But that's where the reader, see, that's the fun part. That's where it comes in. The reader can create their own idea of what's going on there. They could be
I mean,
any, right?
it occurred to me it could be. I can't imagine why. um, in terms of the development here too, because as it has become clear that you've ruminated on this story for a long time, and you say you identify as a fantasist. I'm always curious in terms of where authors place themselves in terms of like a larger genre of horror. Now, would you say you're a dark fantasy writer then?
I would say I kind of, this book in particular, and some of my other writing as well, in particular short fiction, I skirt that line between dark horror, I mean, dark fantasy and horror. Those lines are blurring more and more these days, I think. So I think I could fit comfortably right in the middle there. I
Okay,
also write sci-fi as well. And there's elements, I think, of each that I bring to everything that I write.
fair enough. Um, when did you, as a person, like when did the interest blossom in these ideas?
As a writer in general,
No, just as a person, like when, like were you a little kid and you saw a movie or you read a book or whatever.
I was always a voracious reader. I had no idea that I was going to be a writer. I didn't even have any interest in being a writer, but always a reader. I had a library as a kid that nobody borrowed books from. That's all right. I had my library all the same. I even had um, the little labels, you know, the things in the back where people could sign out. But
Oh, okay, yeah,
um,
the stamp things.
yeah, I went that far. But I think being a reader and always loving books just really helped me develop that sense of wonder, that sense of something out there being bigger and different than where I was at the time. And that always stuck with me. Books have that ability to take you places that you may never go, to give you insight into not only yourself, but to people you may know and people that you may never meet, people who don't look like you, who don't speak the same language as you. So there's just no better means, I think, of understanding humanity, of understanding human psychology. So that was always a gift. I was that kid with the backpack that had, you know, 5 or 10 books back there besides my school books. So they were always my friends and always my means of understanding that there was a world much, much larger than the one that I inhabited.
Was there one
Um,
you returned to over and over?
a book that I returned to over and over.
Hmm.
I was a big fan of the what was it, Nancy Hardy and Nancy Drew mysteries.
Okay, yeah.
Certainly
Hardy
those,
Boys and Nancy Drew.
yeah, Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. Yes, I read those over and over again. And then at some point, probably like everybody, it was Asimov, and it's like I read the Martian Chronicles over and over again, and delved into those. I read widely, so I can read literary, I can read horror, I can read, you know, of course, nonfiction, a bunch of that for research. But reading those books, reading the sci-fi, fantasy, then discovering Tolkien and people like that, that probably informed much, much later my desire to write genre fiction. I was when I started, I thought I would definitely be a literary writer, but I'm writing a literary story, and then suddenly an alien or a demon pops in, so I just decided to go with that.
Um, so as we've said a couple of times, it seems to have been a long labor of love. How long did you work on Bacchanal?
Oh gosh, a long time. I think I started Bacchanal in 2012.
Okay.
Um, and I wrote the book that looks nothing like the one that you see there today. Nothing like it. So I wrote it, I didn't like it, and I set it aside and wrote another thing, actually two other things. And then I came back to it some years later and had different ideas, kind of revamped the whole thing. Even worked with a mentor. I think even worked with an editor just to say, okay, what's wrong here? What's, you know, help me at least figure out where the holes are. And I drafted that another couple times, did a couple more, 2 or 3 more drafts, no, probably 10 more drafts. And then landed my agent, started querying and landed my agent in 2018. We did a heck of a lot more work on the novel from then, and then went on submission. And I think within 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months, landed a publishing deal. And then the book came out in June of this year. So 2012, the seed of the story. I started with the seed, and very little of that seed exists in the novel as you see it today.
It's funny. Grady Hendrix tells basically the same thing. He's like, I write a book and then I throw the book away and write the book.
Yes. Exactly. That was definitely the process for this one. But um, and after you finish the book and after you see all the work that goes into it and realize that it looks nothing like what you originally started with, um, you just realize how much work has to go into publishing. And I have so much respect for authors. I've written some other books that are wholly unpublishable. You won't see those, but I do have another one coming out next year. But just realizing how much work goes into it, because you see it and you're like, from your favorite author, and you're like, okay, why is the next book out in 6 months? Why isn't it out next year? Because it takes years sometimes to figure out the story that you need to tell. And I think authors should be given the time and the space to let those ideas germinate, to let those stories develop, because what you get at the end is so worth it.
So what kept the fire lit on Bacchanal for all that time?
I'm sorry?
What kept you motivated to keep
Uh,
returning to it? And I mean, because that's a long process. So what was the motivation for you?
It was the story. I just knew I had something there. I loved the setting. I loved a couple of the characters that I had, Aloko and Liza. Everybody else, we just kind of grew over the years. But I knew that I had something in that setting. I knew that I had something in the story. Even if I didn't know how to write that story properly at the time, I just knew if I came back to it, I would be able to do something with it. And I'm glad I did.
In terms of the development of the story too, I mean, you tell a couple different types of stories. You have we talked a little bit about the demon story. You've got the supernatural story with Eliza figuring out her power, figuring out how to control her power, and developing that over the course of the novel. Then you also have sort of two love stories that occur as well. What was the decision to interject that into this otherwise, very loaded? I mean, you added another narrative into a story that was already really rich, and so I'm curious behind the decision making there.
I will say that just was not part of the story initially, but I thought, well, she's got to have a love interest of some sort, right? She's a young woman. She's around the age where you might be interested in dating someone or thinking about settling down. So I definitely had the idea that she would have a love interest. The second love interest, that was something that just kind of came out of nowhere. That was something in my brain. One day I sat down and I said, oh, okay, it's not what I thought, someone else. But having her initially interested in Jamie was easy. Jamie is Clay's right hand. They're about the same age. So it made sense that, them being there together, that would be someone that she would be interested in, and that, that feeling would be mutual.
Yeah, that possibility is alluded to really early.
Yes.
Right, when he puts his foot in his mouth.
Absolutely. And I think that's the way that these things start out sometimes. Obviously, she looked at him and she thought, okay, well, he's definitely a little easy on the eyes, so that's a good thing. But then he opens his mouth and ruins it all. But he does come around later. He redeems himself and grows out of it. Now, in writing the story, I realized that Liza would need someone to help her hone her magical abilities. She needed someone to help her keep developing. And Ishe ended up being that character. And Ishe is the were hyena in the novel. And as she spent more time with Ishe, I just felt them growing closer. And I thought, oh, no, this isn't exactly what I thought. Something complicated is happening here. And that's where the love triangle comes in. And I felt really, really bad about doing so because I like Jamie as a character. I think Liza liked Jamie as a person, and I absolutely saw them being together. And I thought that perhaps his background with who his aunt is would be the thing that drove them apart. But in reality, it ended up being her Ishe, kind of her mentor. Again, very close in age. He's a few years older than Jamie, but they're still close enough in age. And I think spending the time together and having those shared challenges, they're both carrying something that Jamie could never relate to. Ishe has a spirit that he shares his body with. And in a sense, Liza doesn't have a spirit, but she has a power within her that she has difficulty controlling. So that kinship between them eventually brought them closer together than I initially thought. And I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I was just
for a while.
it's fascinating because like a lot of the books I've read, for the series, some of these relationships just they pop up, and it's so unexpected. I guess because if I watch like a horror film or something, it's not necessarily developed the way it gets to be developed in a book, and so there's the time
Right.
in a literary sense to do that film lacks.
Absolutely. And that's what happened with, I think, Liza and Ishe. As they spent more time, and their beginning was also really, really bumpy. They flat out didn't like each other very much. But she realized that she needed him. And I think he, with the loss of his family, needed something else to care about, something else to dedicate his time and his energy to. And that over time just brought them closer and closer together.
As we've introduced the phrase "were Aina" into the discourse here,
Mhm.
are there types of creatures you're drawn to more than others?
That, you know what, the were hyena also came out of that research on the mythical African creatures. So I'm drawn more to anything that I haven't seen before. So that's
I
probably,
grant you that one. That was my first were hyena.
yeah, I just thought we've all seen, werewolves. We've seen those, and I love those stories. Stephen Graham Jones wrote a great one. If you haven't
Mhm.
read it, go read it. And it's also horror. But I'm really drawn to characters that we haven't seen on screen or in print before. And certainly, for me at least, the Aloko and also the were hyena were two of those characters. So I have nothing against elves, nothing against werewolves, werewolves or vampires. Love them, read them all. But for me, for writing this novel, I wanted to introduce something that I hadn't seen before
That's
and
fair.
explore that. Right? There's a whole mythology behind it. There's um, a whole range of different shenanigans you can get these types of characters into, and that's kind of what I wanted to explore.
I mean, obviously, it works. It's so fascinating because I feel like you prepare us very well
Mhm.
for what's coming. Because you start off with very I don't know, traditional, commonplace, particularly in the South, animals.
Mhm.
And then the exploration just gets deeper and deeper in terms of like what we're exposed to
Absolutely.
in terms of creatures, and sort of also just even the way that Liza is able to communicate with them. Um,
Yeah, the turtle sprite, Ikaki, is also one of those creatures. And the African turtle sprite, for those who don't know, is a creature that kind of just likes to, they're more like a spirit, I think, than a physical creature. And they like to do spirit things. They like to dance, likes to float around in this water. But yeah, that creature, also the Tasmanian tiger, I was drawn to because it's an animal that I think, um, for most part, is extinct. I've seen stories recently where there's sightings of Tasmanian tigers, and they should have been extinct long ago, even when the story is taking place. So again, I was just kind of drawn to that because I thought, well, this is something that doesn't necessarily still exist in our world, and something I haven't seen in print. So let's learn a little bit about these two and put these as the animals that Liza has to work with, because they will be things that she's unfamiliar with, or animals rather that she's unfamiliar with as well. So that would make her challenge in learning to communicate and to control them that much greater.
yeah, I mean, then you have the all too human variation, right, in terms of like clay, right?
Yes. Yeah, Clay is an interesting character. And again, he came just because I realized that Geneva couldn't function as the main character in the book. But like all of them, I wanted to give Clay a very interesting backstory. So Clay is a former soldier. He was also a former Klan member.
Mm.
But Clay is also, explain the two, I don't know. He's also a very religious person. So Clay got himself into some trouble. Geneva showed up and helped bail him out of that trouble. But in exchange, he bought the life of his son and also, just kind of erased his troubles with the law. But Clay is guilt ridden over everything that he's done. At his heart, I think he's a decent person who, like many, due to peer pressure or other societal pressures, at times he fell in line and did things that he probably necessarily wasn't proud of. So I think in a way, he joins the carnival not only to spare his son and make sure that Geneva isn't, eyeing him, but also as an attempt to redeem himself in a way, to give himself purpose, but also to punish himself. Mm. Because he feels like he knows that he's done things that are wrong. And he knows that he kind of got off from one of those things. So there's several scenes, not several, but a couple of scenes in the book in which Clay exacts revenge on himself, in a sense, for the wrongs that he's done.
I mean, he's interesting. I mean, he's very swarthy, and it's like worldwide. So he and it's strange. He's almost like the facade version of the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, absolutely. Good analogy. I hadn't thought about that.
Not so much the wizard behind the curtain, but the giant head with the flames.
Exactly. Yeah, he's a complicated character, definitely. And at the end, if we can go there, he has an opportunity for redemption. And I think he makes the right decision. But it's a long time coming for him. I don't think that even without Liza joining the carnival, I get a sense that Clay would not have wanted to continue doing what he was doing for very much longer.
Yeah, I wrestled with this character because it was, I mean, I understood his purpose, but I just, he's obviously, as you've already defined, very, very flawed, and probably more so than anyone. I mean, at least the way you give us the history of him.
Yeah.
And so it becomes sort of these interesting pockets that manifest around the experience of the carnival itself.
He was a difficult character to write. He was a difficult character to have empathy for, but I tried to convey even that. One of the things that I hope to accomplish in the novel with all of the characters is to really demonstrate how thin that line is sometimes for us all. And that the notion of good and evil is not as clear as we would like it to be all of the time. That given certain situations, we all may make very, very difficult choices, choices that we may not be proud of, but choices that may save us or save someone we care about. So in writing Clay, I wanted to, and Geneva, and all of them really, I really wanted folks to have an opportunity to not only say, oh my gosh, oh, what you did is horrible, but oh my gosh, on this side, I understand a little bit about who you are and what drove you to make the choices that you made. And I think that's useful for us all to have a little bit more understanding about other people, their choices, their way of life, and ultimately ourselves as well.
No, it's really true. And I mean, you see a lot in contemporary horror thrillers too, this idea of even just one choice almost being like a demon or a ghost itself that haunts you for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. It really is that simple sometimes, right?
Well, I mean, you think of some issues, even like major text in this, right? So maybe like Stephen King's Thinner is the first one that pops into mind, right? Just one event sets off the entire novel. And I mean, I think that's actually one of the more frightening concepts out there.
Yeah, one decision, one choice can so very fundamentally change your existence. I'm curious, did you feel any level of empathy for Clay?
Yeah, because I mean, when you put yourself, I think I felt it earlier on before I knew all the history. I felt less as I went along.
Mm-hmm.
I was very curious about his relationship with his family
Mm-hmm.
fairly early on.
Yeah.
Um, and I was wondering where that was going to go, and like different ideas were popping through my head
Mm-hmm.
in terms of it. I mean, it is interesting. Like I sense that he was a father before
Yeah.
it was revealed he was a father,
Okay.
and I think that's where the empathy
Mm-hmm.
did derive, because I sensed it in his relationship both to Jamie and Eliza fairly early on.
Mm-hmm.
And even when he was, sort of like given tasks that he didn't want to complete, and his
Right.
own recognition in those tasks. Those are the moments I found
Yeah.
empathy for him, because
And
I could
those
relate to that too.
outside of that, I know it's tough, but that's
Not that
absolutely
I've had to bury children, but I.
that was my intention in those moments, to say, okay, there is a human being here. He's made some difficult choices, but there's some reasoning behind it. I'm not saying you got to like Clay. I just want people to think.
Well, I mean, I like the fact that you say that, he's punishing himself, and there's almost a sense of atonement that I actually hadn't considered when I was reading it. But now
Yeah,
I'm talking to you and thinking back on it, it makes a lot of sense.
absolutely.
Because that's interesting as a concept too, because that's missing from a lot textually, I think, anymore too. You don't get those. I don't know. Self guilt isn't a driver as much as solipsism anymore.
I absolutely agree. And I just wanted my characters to be fully fleshed out, to not be all one thing or the other, because frankly, I think most people are that. We're not all one thing. There's potential for good and bad in all of us. And I wanted people to really understand where the characters came from, and to just kind of carry that into your own life and think about that for yourself, the choices that we all have made, some difficult. I'm not saying that any of us have gone to the extreme of the characters in this novel, but I
Or
just
could,
wanted to, yes, or could.
unless you're not telling us something, Veronica.
But I love the dialogue. I love the idea that we can discuss these things and have the dialogue around how we would make those same difficult choices. Would we be so staunch if your child was on the line, or your life was on the line? Could you make the right decision? And I think it's an interesting question to think about.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of stuff I've read for this series, that there have been a couple of times where that's come up. The Hunger was one of these, because obviously it's based on a true story with the Donner Party as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And just the ideas of what would you do as a challenge. And it's fascinating, because I feel like in terms of horror in itself too, the what would you do is often so exaggerated in
Yeah,
terms of the event that it can't come to mind. But in Bacchanal, we have some legitimate real world choices that I think even today in 2021 ring true, even though textually it's set 90 years prior.
right. There was another character that just came to mind that made a very difficult choice, and that's Liza's best friend in the carnival, Hope. She and Liza become fast friends and become best friends. Hope is almost sort of like a friend slash mother to her. And when Liza eventually finds her little sister, Twiggy, and entrusts her to Hope, Hope also has to make a very difficult decision, because of her own life, because of who she's trying to protect. Now, it's a decision that doesn't sit well with anyone, particularly her husband. But I wanted the audience to think about why she had to make that choice and what you would do in her place.
No, it's true. I mean, gosh, the more I think on it too, it's like the book could have just been called Choices as much
Yeah.
as Bacchanal.
And how to make the wrong one.
Right. Right. If you were to go the snarky title.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, even Geneva has, I mean, she has her own guilts and things too that she struggles with.
Yes, Geneva is a conflict, right? She she knows what she does is wrong, but she still wants to survive. I mean, at the heart of this, she's like, I want to live. I like living. I like my existence. I want to live, and if I have to do something bad to live, I'm going to do it in a manner that makes it palatable for me. And in a sense, she also views the carnies as her responsibility. She believes that she's providing a service to society and employing these people and ensuring that they're fed, ensuring that they have a home, that they're comfortable. Her guards, the Dahomey soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
they actually go out on raiding missions to get things for the carnies. And this is all at Geneva's direction because there's part of her that is, mothering. There's part of her that is trying to be a friend to Clay, even though she has not a clue of how to be a good friend. In her own way, this is what she is doing to ingratiate herself to someone. And at the heart of it, she's still just a wounded child, right? Her life was stolen from her very early, and she's had to make her way without much direction except from a bunch of folks in the underworld. So this is what we end up with. But at the same time, she's friends with Queenie. She's helped Queenie. She's taken in Queenie's nephew and Jamie. And again, she likes to look out for the people that are members of her carnival. So Geneva she's a mix of things as well.
Yeah, at times you have to wonder. I had to wonder, like, how much money was coming into this place.
There probably wasn't a ton of money, but they stole whatever else they could afford.
Right? I just like, this is the mafia carnival here, the demon mafia carnival.
Absolutely. She had some strong arms to go out and take care of everything else that they needed.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely an interesting type of money laundering going through here, in which you had to like juxtapose it to the very dim-witted public administrator in the towns.
Yeah, I guess I didn't paint them all in the best of light.
But, I think you painted them perfectly. I think you nailed it.
That was my attempt, is to think about what the people in these towns would want, right? And yeah, they want some entertainment, because who doesn't want a carnival to come to town, right? But at the same time, they want to get this entertainment as cheaply as possible. And if they can fit in some extras for themselves, then that's just gravy.
I mean, that was, I don't know, they're almost the comic relief in some ways too, right? And I mean, I think that's necessary to some degree as well.
Yeah, certainly with a story this heavy, with this such difficult themes, definitely needed a little bit of comic relief in there as well.
So let me ask you, going back to larger themes again, different people have different desires when they produce a novel or a film. Was there anything in terms of like identity, let's say, that stuck out as what you were trying to drive a message? Because you do have such a cosmopolitanism to it, right? It's not particularly gendered. It's not particularly leaning towards any race over another either. So I'm curious in terms of like the voice and the identity of that voice you were trying to communicate.
I definitely wanted to make this book, the base of it had to be African. That had to be the impetus for it. That had to be even Liza discovering a little bit more about her African roots, reconnecting with who she really was there. That's a larger message that I wanted to convey to African Americans here in America. Can't speak to other places, but I think largely in the Caribbean, even in South America, African populations there retained a little bit more of their culture than we did. So I definitely wanted that theme to be prevalent in the novel, and that there are two parts of you now, and it's okay. And in fact, it's better for you to reconnect with both of those parts. Beyond that, I wanted it to be a story about the American South, about the people that populate this area. I think it's a segment of the society that's often overlooked in literature. So I wanted to definitely paint that in a light that was as realistic as I could and as positive as I could. But yeah, I think those were probably the overarching themes that I wanted to convey in the novel.
Okay, because I mean, I was reading it more as this sort of cultural approach rather than necessarily I don't have the right word for it, but I mean, like, so sometimes it's like a very strong driven female voice in a book, right? But
Yeah.
this is definitely much more a unified voice than that, rather than a
Yeah.
singularity. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to get at with my question.
Oh, yes, and I definitely agree with that. Liza is indeed a strong female character, and that's what I wanted for her. But definitely the cultural themes, I think, were the driver behind this novel. And that's more of what I wanted to convey for all of the characters. When you look at it, Bombardier is from Senegal, Ishe, Nigeria. Same thing with Geneva to a degree. So definitely the culture of America, of Africa, and then of the South.
Yeah, and those are, if I had to tick off
Mhm.
what was sort of like a legacy for me in terms of being a reader of it, um, which was fascinating because it changed in kind of like a spectacular way. It changed how I read it too from start to finish. As more was revealed, it sort of like shifted the whole view of like how my mind's eye had created, the
Okay.
carnival itself.
Yeah, I'm glad that came across because that absolutely was the intention. This book, I mean, the history was really important to me. A lot of research went into the history of the 1930s, definitely of carnival culture and things like that, and also just American history and African history and folklore. So if all of those things came across, then my job is well done.
All right. So let me ask you, since obviously this is a heavy research project, give us a factoid that's not in the book that struck you from that research.
Oh gosh, that's a good one. Something that's not in the book. Um, Maybe I think probably something that I didn't put in the book, but comes into play is just the ecological damage of the Dust Bowl
Mm,
and what created it, the whole thing. And what I learned is that it was, severe drought, and that was one thing. And then it was some bad farming practices that all kind of just created this ecological disaster that was the Dust Bowl. So yes, at the end we have the effects of the Dust Bowl, but I didn't talk about what went into creating that whole disaster and actually how long it took to recover from it.
um, so to wrap this up, I have some general questions I tend to ask everybody. So because I'm
Mhm.
always curious. The first one is, what are you reading now?
What I'm reading now is a short story collection by Roxane Gay, and it's called IT. It's a collection of stories that are set in Haiti,
Okay.
or IT, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That's just outstanding. I can't say too much about it because I just love what I've read so far, but I'm only halfway through. Beyond that, I am also reading a Stephen King novella that's called Elevation.
Okay.
And what else is out there? I've got a ton of research books that I'm reading for my next novel, but those are the two that are foremost in my mind. Also, just finished reading The Unbroken by C.L. Clark, which is also a winner.
What are you looking forward to reading?
What am I looking forward to reading? Let's see, there's some things coming out. The Master of Jinn by P. Jelly Clark. That's one. And there was another one. I think it's called The Chosen One. And I can't remember if that's the right name or not, but yeah, I'll just stick with that one.
One thing we ask guests is to give us a horror blasphemy. So something you love or dislike that is otherwise popular or disliked.
Horror blasphemy. Um, I love the original Dracula novel. I
Okay.
don't like too many of the Dracula movies that I've seen, but the original Dracula novel I love and I reread at least every couple of years.
I'm actually teaching a class in the novel in the fall, so I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yes, love it.
Um, in terms of Bacchanal, is there a Second Life future on the horizon for it?
I will say I will keep the door open, not at this time. Nothing is absolutely in the works, but I'm keeping that door open.
Okay. And you've alluded pretty strongly to the next work. Do you want to give us a teaser?
Actually, my next novel is another dark fantasy that's set in New Orleans. It's a modern day fantasy that kind of skirts the lines of fantasy and horror as well. But that's coming out, I believe, in February or March of next year. So be on the lookout for that. And I am working on now book three.
Oh. Do we have a title for book two?
Book two is going to be called The Quarter Storm.
Okay.
That's set in New Orleans.
All right. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about Bacchanal.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
My pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in. And as always, stay spooky. Thank you for joining us on SunScream. Tune in next time for Andy Davidson.